Hello everyone, it's been a while since I've had time to actually make a building video of creativity. Actually, this looks like crap, but anyway. So all of you who know me know that I'm a big Star Trek nerd. Sci-fi in general, actually. But I grew up around Star Trek, so I kind of like it more than most genres. Star Wars being a very close second, of course. And I realize there's this whole thing about Star Wars versus Star Trek and blah 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 blah. Who would win? Doody and all the new Star Wars stuff and the new Star Trek stuff that supposedly put unrealistic amounts of energy and power and numbers in their ships now, which according to the laws of thermodynamics would mean that the ship would vaporize in space, but we're not going to pretend that that's, that reality is a thing. Anyway, if you look past all that, it's actually a really cool concept. And me personally, I like Gene Roddenberry's original warp design rules because it forces you to build and create ships that have restrictions. The same type of restrictions that engineers have to deal with on a daily basis whenever they're designing something. For example, for the longest time in human history, when it came to the fuel-injected engine, the process was very simple. Put something explosive into a chamber, blow it up, and have it come out the other end as exhaust. The piston would drive a crankshaft, which would drive something like a vehicle wheel or an airplane propeller, but no matter how much power you'd put into that thing, no matter how much fuel you put in that thing, even if you had it a super awesome mixture, you were limited to the physics of the entire engine operation. You could only get so much out of something that makes something go boom and pushes down or drives down a piston to turn a crank. And even now with more modern day engines like the jet engine and whatnot, it's still the same type of physics. You can only squeeze so much out of this process before you can't squeeze any more out of it. You are limited to the thermodynamics and the physics of the process in order to make it work. A piston cannot have anything in between it and the fuel mixture. That's just how it works. If there is something in between the two, it won't work. If it doesn't get enough oxygen, it won't work. If it doesn't get enough fuel, it won't work. If it doesn't ignite precisely when it's supposed to, it won't work. No matter how much you believe, it's not going to work. If you want something better, if you want something faster, if you want something that exceeds the physics operation of the engine that you have created, then you're going to have to develop something brand new. And even now, with today's jet engines and everything else, you still have to bow down to the laws of physics, aka design limitations. So when Gene Roddenberry made the warp drive, he made it so that they had to work in tandem with each other. One warp nacelle was not able to warp space-time. It could, but it wouldn't do anything. It'd just sit there and look at you, stare at you, judge you. However, if it had another warp engine next to it, now it could ebb and flow space-time, allowing it to actually become a mode of transportation. And if anything was in between the line of sight between the two, the amount of energy that was being emitted between the two warp nacelles would fry, destroy, or completely disable whatever the hell was in the middle, according to Gene Roddenberry. This made sense. This makes sense on an engineering level, which for someone like me who's an artist and an engineer, I absolutely love, because it forces you to think outside the box. It forces you to come up with solutions. Now, this is of course the same guy who absolutely loved the USS Defiant when it first came out, and who knows how the hell the Klingon warbird even works. But that's when you start pushing away from the whole engineering part of it and diving deeper into the art part of it. See, art doesn't care what physics is or does. Art doesn't care about logical limitations of technology or physics. It just cares about whether or not it's pretty. And I'm not talking about something brand new but yet the same physics, like a ramjet engine or something. It's the same thing. I'm talking like something completely brand new, like some sort of magnetic levitation drive, some sort of gravity well tunnel drive that negates that entire physics process and operates on another level of thermodynamics completely. Like for instance, if you want a warp drive that doesn't need to have the two nacelles together in order to create the warp field using subspace as a mediator, then invent an entirely different drive where you only need one type of nacelle, and maybe it uses a different types of way of warping space-time, if it warps space-time at all, like the quantum slipstream drive or something. But anyway, I'm getting off topic. Basically, same thing with warp drive. And that's what I believe Gene Roddenberry was trying to produce when he made these rules. Now, of course, there's going to be people in the comments that are going to be like, well, because technology got better, they were able to create it so you could only have one warp nacelle that magically somehow didn't need another one in order to bounce off blah, 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 blah. And, you know, somehow now magically they have some sort of new technology that allows something to be in the middle of two warp nacelles and not cook and destroy everybody in between because magic. And I get it. It's all make-believe anyway, in a sense. It's science fiction, not fantasy like Harry Potter. It's literal science fiction where people use science to try to predict some sort of fictional technology. And so you can kind of go all over the place with that. I could sit here and talk for hours about the difference between science fiction and fantasy and how genres like Star Wars somehow mix the two, but that would be for another video. In this video, I wanted to build something that was like pre-Federation, very early warp tech, maybe somewhere around the 2100s, or hell, even the 2090s on the Star Trek timescale. If you go back and do your homework, there's a lot of discrepancies and contradictions throughout the entire genre of Star Trek, but then again, that's with any genre, really. It switches hands, it has different studios, different writers. A lot of times the writers don't stay true to the lore. It gets ugly. So we're just gonna say a little bit before 2100s or 2100-ish time frame. Most of the warp travel happens within solar system, and the ones that happen outside of solar system or have larger spacecraft, because it takes months if not years to get to certain star systems with warp 1 and 2 and maybe even 3 respectively. So this ship would be like a small cargo ship, something that would operate probably in the rim world outer reaches starter colony areas of United Earth. It would ferry goods and supplies and sometimes people back and forth between planets, but rarely ever actually make a trip to another star system. I could see a very large cargo vessel making the months and months long trip, or maybe even a year trip to some of these outer colonies, which they would then deliver these smaller spacecrafts to different colonies in order for them to use for their own personal needs. So the spacecraft would need several things. It would need VTOL, because in some of these colonies there wouldn't be any runways. It would need atmospheric control, because if you're going to put a colony on a M-class planet per se, or maybe even a planet that could support life but it's not exactly an Earth-like world, it'd still have an atmosphere. But also it would have to be able to deliver to colonies that maybe exist on atmospheric-less worlds or moons. So it'd have to be like a jack of all trades, master of none, but better than a master of one kind of ship, Swiss Army knife. And I could imagine that over the years there would be certain upgrades and whatnot, and some of the colonies might even get rid of some of these ships by trading them to local traders or whatever that might use them for their own personal gains and whatnot. I mean, I realize that Star Trek, especially the Federation, I don't know about United Earth, would find a way to create a government that doesn't use money in the sense that we can understand, even though throughout the entire franchise they always talk about buying stuff, but let's not pretend that actually happened. So there is a form of currency, it's just not the kind that we're used to, I guess. But yeah, I thought it'd be a cool little ship. And I wanted to change the warp drive so it was a little different from your normal typical nacelle. It was a nacelle that worked in two parts. You had the emitting part, which would warp space-time, but then you'd have the Bazard collector separate from the actual warp engine. And during times where it was flying towards a planet or in the atmosphere, the warp emitter part of the ship would tuck back in up against the collector. But yeah, there it is. Of course, it's all Kraken drive. I used the Cal 1000 to generate fuel, but I didn't want it to generate too much fuel. I wanted the ship to have to refuel eventually, so I made it so it produces 90% of the fuel while 100% is being burned, so you get very small sip of fuel slowly disappearing. I didn't want infinite fuel. If I wanted that, I could just go to hyper edit. And I wanted something that would, you know, if something broke in the ship, then it wouldn't work anymore. Not infinite fuel kind of sucked. I wanted something that was, you know, mechanically working. But anyway, let me know what you guys think. Again, thank you so much for watching, and thank you so much for being part of this channel. If you liked what you saw, please leave a like, and if you loved it, consider subscribing. We also have a membership program. If you become a member, you get cool little emojis and badges and stuff next to your name. Pretty cool. Check it out. But anyway, I'll see you all in the next video or stream. Bye for now. Bye-bye.